it's so amusing to see the waves go crash down on me and drag me into the sea. Why's it so easy to be so indifferent to me when I wear my heart on my sleeve?
Welcome to Skechcraft, the podcast for art, games, and process junkies. I'm Rob Duenas, full-time illustrator and graphic artist esquire. This is an unedited podcast, which means there will be cursing from time to time, so please be aware. With that being said, here we go.
Like a willow tree, getting pulled down by gravity. By gravity. My gravity. My gravity.
Hey everybody, welcome to Skechcraft, the podcast for art, games, and process junkies. I am Rob Duenas, and this is 2013. What the freak? So hey, it is January 27th. That's 27 days of the year without a podcast, or 2 or 3. What have I been doing? Well, let me give you a quick intro to what has been going on for the past 26 days. First off, I did record a major podcast that was going to be, I was going to actually put that out on the 1st. I've talked about this before. During the day, I work on and develop and create and make and slave, pick 2 out of 3 over t-shirts and men's and boys apparel. Primarily, sometimes I do some juniors art and stuff like that, like for Death Note and everything. But so I was going to take like at least 100 of the shirts that I've done over the past year, which is probably about 5 or 10% of the total amount of shirts that I have made. And then sort of do a big podcast where you get the PDF and you go through each shirt and I'll talk about, and everything else. And that sounds pretty interesting, right? That sounds pretty awesome. You get to see all the stuff I did. And what sort of happened is first I recorded it and I had my buddy Joe over with me, and we've been working really late every night this past month, getting ready for Magic next month, which is a big clothing convention we do twice a year. So we came over, we recorded it, and because things were a little hectic at work, we were probably a little cynical about t-shirts, and I thought, that's fun, but at the same time, I don't really, if one of these guys listens to that and it comes back to me, I can't jeopardize my job over the show, right? So I thought that probably wouldn't be best, and I'd really like to kind of focus on the creation aspect and not just, completely bitch for an hour or two. So I was like, I'll just re-record this. And then I gave it the week, and so like the second week of January, I went in to do that, and right before I did that, I got this whole like new employee handbook at work, and there was this whole, I don't know, basically there are a lot of sort of draconian kind of rules and stuff that to me sort of didn't really matter in the grand scheme of things, but it's really kind of left like a sour taste on it. That sounds really, really weird. It just left a really sour mood. And I've come to the realization that if I talk about t-shirts, and I've said this before, but I think it really holds true. If I talk about t-shirts and I show you t-shirts, I'm only going to get more offers to do t-shirt work, right? I'm only going to get more feedback on doing t-shirts. And chances are, because you guys and gals are all awesome, you'll probably go out there and purchase these shirts, right? So, and honestly, if you're going to pick anything up to help support the show, the posters, the prints, and when I'm able to do commissions, that actually helps support what I do and what I'm here to help you do. Buying t-shirts from my company, although, technically that's great because they pay me, my audience and you guys are so tiny on the blip of the radar, it actually doesn't matter. And I really don't see commissions or bonus or anything like that ever. It's just a job I go to, I get paid to do, I get an hourly wage, I come home. I mean, it may as well be Starbucks. It happens to be t-shirts. So I'm really done talking about t-shirts on this cast, unless I ever make my own, right? I'm done with it. I'm not interested in talking about it, other than to mention that that's what I do for a living. So if you would like more information on how to make t-shirts and get into that industry, I would have to say, please seek the internet. There are plenty of options for that. And I don't really want to do it anymore. Not that I've done it much here, but I'm making an affirmation. All right, so let's move on. So what else have I been up to this month? Okay, if you've been following DeviantArt and the Facebook, and if you haven't, you should go to the Facebook and like the page and follow the updates, because I put a lot of updates, at least daily or every other day on there, as well as posting on the DeviantArt, and it helps, sort of grow the show and show people that, hey, there's actually people who listen to this thing. But what I've been posting are these little mini digipaints and landscape digital landscape paintings for the past month and a half. And I've been getting a lot of questions as to why I've been doing those. And that sort of facilitates a couple things. One, I really just want to, I learned how to draw through landscape illustration, but it was always like drawing like contour line stuff or cross hatching. So then I got into character art because my characters sucked, and I used to kind of like overcompensate backgrounds for characters. I could endlessly draw you, rooms full of stuff or forests full of things, but my characters were pretty horrible. And so then now that then when I got into comic book covers and stuff, I started to integrate more background stuff. However, my process for painting them was really, really bad. Bad in that the quality wasn't horrible, but the process in which I made them really didn't facilitate any kind of productivity whatsoever. And half the time I was spending more time just like drawing details in the background that didn't need to be there. Case in point, if you look at the Richie Rich covers, there are, and I've done a few tutorials on the cast about this, like when I'm doing the background with all the coffins, drawing all those coffins with some lines and stuff digitally, even that minimal amount is really, it takes more time than it should. So I really wanted to come up with a better way of doing this. And yeah, I look at all the tutorials and I have all the Gnomon DVDs and I kind of see what they're doing, but I could never get the color quality. And what I'm trying to, I skipped a part. What I mean is generally how it's done is one of two ways. Okay, one, you just paint straight color and then you add value being your shadow or your light or your highlights. Okay, and that's one way of doing it. Two, the other way to do it, and the way it's generally done on a more professional level, is that you do a very tonal black and white background, and then you sort of convert that to color. I know, like in traditional art, say Drew Struzan, right? That's how he does a lot of his paintings. He has a value painting in pencil and in basic acrylic, and then builds up the color from there, right? Using acrylic paints and Prismacolors. So I wanted to do that. The problem is every time I started out with the black and white drawing or painting and I added color to it, it looked like a really bad dodge and burn, sort of a really cheesy Photoshop looking thing. And every tutorial I could get on the subject was the same thing. Even stuff from like Genzo Man or whatever, it's always this like black and white, and then they're like, oh, I add a multiply and an overlay layer and I magically get this color. But then if you always read the fine print, somewhere in there or in the forums, they'll say, oh, well, there's some variations, and I do some color variations to sort of modify it, or I do some adjustments. And I didn't understand what that meant, other than, okay, an adjustment layer. And I understand adjustment layers in Photoshop. But what I found was that if you take a tonal drawing and you go to adjustment layer, selective color, in that selective color Dropbox menu, you'll get, what we do is a window will pop up and it'll say like red. You have a little red swatch. If you click that, you can select all the primary channels plus value, and the value will be white, neutral, black. So from there, I can color shift the tonal drawing into neutral color schemes. From the neutral values to the whites, I can turn white into an off blue or a yellow or whatever I want it to be. And then I can go into the black, the darker areas of the image, and shift that over into a darker color. And that changed everything. Like, that solved my problems. I could go as saturated or as unsaturated as I wanted to. I could do two of those and then sort of like mask them together, and then using an overlay and a multiply layer kind of paint on top of that. And I've been using this month to work that process out. And what used to probably take me 8 or 9 hours to do takes me 2 to 3 hours at this point. Now I'm doing whole background paintings from scratch in 2 hours. I just colored, to move forward, I just colored this He-Man commission. I drew it as a commission. I wanted to color it. So I just did this Masters of the Universe He-Man commission that I'd done as a sketchy, brutal, $60, $80 poster print since a cinema commission. And then I just colored that raw sketch. It's really sketchy. Using this process. And I actually have print sets available, so I'll get into that in a second. But using this process, it only took me, I spent 2 hours on the tonal and then 4 hours on the color. And being that I was a little unsure how to get the skin tones, I could probably knock an hour of that off. So right now, that's 6 hours to color the whole thing, probably 5. Now, that would take me 10 to 12 hours, maybe 14 hours before to color, because I'd be blending skin tones together and everything. And now I can just sort of focus exactly on color and color detail. So I'll be going into a lot of in-depth stuff on this process. Don't feel like if you didn't write all that down or you didn't get it or understand what I'm talking about, I'll be showing a lot of this process over the next year, over the next weeks. I mean, believe me, this is how I'll be working from here on out, one way or the other. So I do have copies of that Master of the Universe color print plus a copy of the pencils on like a nice Bristol board recreation for $20 plus $5 shipping. There are links on the podcast notes, and the links are also on my DeviantArt. You can see that there. And I'm only doing 20 of those online, so I'll have more at cons if you see me there. I'm kind of differentiating between online and cons since I only go to like 1 or 2 conventions a year. But I've already sold half, so if you'd like to get one, they'll be signed and numbered, and I'll ship that directly to you. That would support the show. So let me briefly wrap this up with saying that I have already recorded minicast 29, which I'll be posting immediately after this. So by the time you get this, it'll be 2 casts, and that is my first interview, or my second interview actually, with Ray Height. So my first interview with Ray Height, but my second interview for the podcast. And we'll be talking about his recent Kickstarter for his book called Midnight Tiger, which that came out really nice. So I've already done all the editing. It's done. It's rendered. It's good to go. And then lastly, speaking of conventions, I have already paid for and will be at the Phoenix Con in May. There is a con right now this weekend going on in Phoenix, but I was unfortunately I was unable to go because of magic and everything else. So I can't bail out of work for a week right now. So, but that's already paid for, and then I'll probably be doing one more after that. I'm uncertain whether that'll be on the other side of the coast or if it'll be, again in Vegas or in Portland or somewhere. I don't know. We'll see. I get a lot of requests to go all around, on the East Coast and see a lot of people, and that's great. I still have trouble moving supplies. I've been told that I should just mail it to the hotel ahead of time. So that's a possibility. If you have any suggestions or tips for going to conventions across the country and how you sort of move your prints or your supplies around and getting that done, just email me at rob@sketchcraft. That's sketch, C-R-A-F-T, the name of the podcast.com. Just email me there, and I will definitely be willing to share your tips and as well as use them as best I can. So with that being said, we're all wrapped up. Let's get on to the topic of the show. Okay, and we are back. So as with every minicast, I have sort of something to rant about or to talk about. And the thing that I kind of want to get to the most right now is I'm going to call this only as good as your last project. And what I mean by that is, to sum it up, is that people, as an artist, right, in my opinion, people only seem to know what you can do based on what you have done. Let me give you an example. It was recently this week and last week, it was announced that J.J. Abrams, the director, J.J. Abrams will be directing episode 7 of Star Wars. You all know this as geeks. If you haven't, then shame on you. And the big run around on the internet is, oh, now we're going to add lens flares to Star Wars, and he did Star Trek, so he can't do this, and he's going to ruin it. I don't know. And so what I'm trying to say is, well, that's interesting. So the guy, because he worked on Star Trek before, can't work on Star Wars, which is really weird, because you would think, hey, the guy did space stuff before, he can't do space stuff again. But I can understand, because it's another property, and there's this whole, like, you know, it's like football, right? You know, my team versus your team, or politics, you know, oh, you're Republican, Democrat. But more to the point, it really sort of interests me. It's like, okay, so let me ask, I've asked friends of mine who they thought should direct the movie. And a lot of it goes, well, you know, Joss Whedon or somebody like that. And I keep thinking, like, well, why? Well, he's a geek, he gets stuff in Serenity. And I'm like, so if a guy did space stuff before, he can do space stuff in the future. So this guy did space, well, he can't. And I'm trying to think, well, let's go back to 1977. I tell you that a guy who directed an art movie called THX 1138 and a 50s hot rod movie called American Graffiti is going to make sort of a Buck Rogers science fiction samurai movie. And I think that the reaction, and I'm pretty certain, having looked at many, you know, sort of interviews about the subject, would be that these day and age, that doesn't even make sense, that the reaction would be, what the fuck, right? Or, okay, whatever, this guy, you know. And I think that you know, irregardless if you say, well, the artist uses a certain technique in one thing, they'll use a technique into another, I do find that a lot of times that if someone, you know, is known for doing one thing, they really aren't sort of brought up to think that they might be able to do another. And maybe that isn't directly parallel to that argument, but just because a guy uses a million lens flares in one movie, you think, oh, he's going to use them in another, well, he uses them all in his movie. And I keep thinking, like, well, that's like saying, well, Jim Lee uses cross-hatching in one book when he drew X-Men, so he'll be using cross-hatching in Justice League, and that's going to ruin the movie. Like, that's an art technique. Or he can't draw Justice League because he worked on X-Men, which is absurd. What you really want to do with any project is find someone who has passion for it. And I sort of always try to take that to an extreme in my case, right? Trying to relate it back to myself and what I do. Being that in the past year, when I go to conventions, I have met people who have wanted to work with me on projects, and they'll see what I've done at Big Dog, right? Say with the penny covers and some of the critter stuff. And I get a lot of offers for drawing, like, oh, draw my hot babe book, or draw this with the chick. And then they go, well, what have you been doing? You know, you've been working on, like, Richie Rich stuff, you know? What's that all about? And it's like, well, you know, just because, like, I draw hot chick covers here doesn't mean I'm the hot chick cover guy. You know what I mean? Like, there are plenty of people for that. And I've always sort of admired the artists that sort of, like, do one thing and then flip to another and then kind of flip to another. Probably the most extreme example of that would be, like, Stanley Kubrick, the director Stanley Kubrick, who's probably never made the same movie twice. Now, not everyone's capable of that. You know, I think if you really want to be successful, the staple is you find one thing you're kind of good at doing and you sort of, like, repeat it, right? However, I do find that you can sort of, and I've said this before, as artists, if you take that to how you draw, like you say you draw really cartoony characters pretty well. If you just keep drawing cartoony characters, at some point you'll begin to parody yourself. And I could name drop a few artists who started out with a pretty solid cartoony illustrative style, and then after 5 years of it start to turn into, like, super trapezoidal, ultra crazy perspective, weird looking people, because the style tends to overtake the storytelling. And maybe Michael Bay, you know, competently directed a Bad Boys movie, or The Rock, which is still a fun movie, even though it's kind of all over the place. But you compare The Rock and how that was directed, right, and to Transformers 2, and we got real problems. So looking back at my stuff that I've done over the years, I keep and where I've been going, I can sort of give you examples out of how this has sort of helped or hurt my personal and professional career, and you sort of take this from this what you want. I think the best advice I've ever given or was ever given in college was one thing. It was from a guy who's our student director. His name was Christian Bradley, who did a lot of textures in video games. Really cool guy. A lot of the pioneer games like Quake and this and that. But I was sitting in his office once and complaining about the school and everything else. And, you know, he told me, you know, Rob, because my thing at the time was I was like, we're doing a little bit of everything right here and I can't focus on anything. And my idea was like, well, when you go to an art college, you tend to pick a major and you kind of focus on it. And we're not focusing on everything. I'm all over the fucking place. And he told me two things. He said, well, one, if you only do one thing, when you get into a production and they're done with that one thing, they let you go. So if you're just a guy or a girl who models trees and they decide to make a sports game and you can't model the stadium, you're messed up, right? Or if you don't know anything else like lighting or animation or interface, if you don't have like a general knowledge of that, then maybe you'll be let go, or maybe they won't pick you up at all. So he always told me about be wary of specialization. Try to be as diverse as you can. Pick things that are your favorite, but make sure that you have a wide variety of skill sets. Is like, and then two, he says, we can teach a lot of different things here. We can teach you perspective to an extent. We can kind of show you perspective, really, right? They don't really teach it. We can show you this and that, but the thing they can't teach is quality. Quality can't be taught, and this is probably the most. Those two things were really the thing that affected me. But that one thing right there really stood out. Is I can't teach you how to make great art. Okay. I can show you how I made things I was proud of. I can show you how I made things that have helped my career or that I feel have helped my skill set being an artist. And whether you believe that is the same, whether you think that's a great drawing or not, it's always subjective. But I can't teach you kind of how to do that. I can show you the process that I created to get there. But to fully teach you like how to make the decisions, well, how do you give something life or energy? I sort of feel like putting like a soul into the art. I'm not a deeply religious person, but to give something that it's alive or a vibrancy or energy, that's the quality, I believe. And that's how you sort of like can differentiate between someone who cared and someone who didn't give a shit and, just got the job done. Probably the easiest way to explain it would be like in cooking. Like you never really want to have, an angry cook. Like if you got someone who's kind of pissed off and mad at the world making you dinner, food's going to turn out horribly. And it could be the same amount of ingredients and same cooking time, but there is something karmic about food. And I think you really want like a jolly, happy chef, as much as you can, because the food comes out better, in my opinion. So let me quickly go back through stages of my career really quickly. I got about 6 different phases. So if I could start around 98, 99, I drew a lot of cartoons and animated stuff. I'm going to do my best to get an example of this all scanned in and put up with the cast. So if I have that, I will mark that down on show notes and you'll have links to that. And if not, just take my word for it, because digging through my old volumes of stuff is not something I'm prepared to do today. But at some point, I definitely will be doing a whole cast on that. So I was sort of known for doing cartoony and animated stuff. And my influences at the time artistically were like the Ed McGuinness and Humberto Ramos and a sort of cartoonier thing, mostly because everyone at the time was drawing like Jim Lee and sort of ultra gritty. And I liked fun. I liked Impulse at the time. So I sort of was known for doing this sort of like big head, big hands, crazy animated stuff. And a lot of background art because I couldn't draw characters. I would draw them with big heads and big feet. I couldn't draw them from different angles. I would hide them by drawing like tons of grass and trees or books and stuff like that. That being said, when people would see my art, they would sort of liken it to, probably what you would call chibi stuff today. That really wasn't all that big in the mid-90s. So, I think that at the time, it was like, well, people would look at the art I'd show them and they go, well, maybe you could draw like the animated books, like the Batman Adventures or, Young Justice hadn't even come out yet. And maybe that's something you could do. But I always felt like, well, it kind of, I couldn't figure out why. That sounded interesting to me. However, it also felt limiting. I was like, I guess I was only drawing cartoony stuff because it was fun. But I would look at the art for like Capcom fighting games and I was like, well, why can't I draw like a Street Fighter book? And they go, well, Street Fighter is like, I mean, Malibu had done a comic book, you know, and like, I was like, why doesn't G.I. Joe look like Capcom art? Why can't I kind of draw G.I. Joe and it look like some Capcom art? And now I say that, and that sort of makes sense because Udon's, you know, conquered the Capcom comic book world and everything. But at the time, it was hard to like make that leap for friends. I was like, why can't Star Wars look like Street Fighter 3 or sorry, Street Fighter 2 or Street Fighter Alpha, which is brand new, or Darkstalkers, which was brand new. And that's really where I was kind of trying to go with it. You know, as best I could was try to add that. So, you know, you move forward a few years to when I first started going to college, and my character art sort of evolved a bit and became more detailed, more better. But I was doing a lot of really crazy perspective. And in my gallery, there's some links to like some Ninja Turtles art that I used to do. They were kind of oversized, sort of sumo looking. And there would be these crazy backgrounds. There's this Batman piece with this tornado looking background. And that was me sort of kind of just playing with perspective. But again, the word a lot that I got at the time was that it was, you know, it was interesting, but it was strange. And then I'd have people at work or in a studio kind of come around and go, "Oh, Rob does crazy perspective. He doesn't know what he's talking about." And yeah, if you want to turn your character, make them all weird, but if you just want to draw someone, you don't use construction. So they sort of liken my fundamentals of construction and form to just crazy, you know, fisheye lens stuff. And it's kind of funny. Some artists have hit me up since then and said that my artwork then is better now, you know, which is always weird because I'm like, why would you email someone that you, I don't know, like another artist hitting me up? It's like, have you spent that much time to look at all my gallery and tell me you thought that was better? Because I got to be honest, I couldn't get one job based off that art. It was kind of fun for people on the internet to kind of look at, and some artists thought it was fun. But when I go to conventions, little kids would laugh at it and go, "Oh, that looks like, you know, he's making fun of the turtles." And I think some people can pull that off better than others. Like Kaiser's a guy on the internet. He's an animation concept artist and developer who seems to pull off the weirder styles and stuff. I think at the time, I just didn't really have a good fundamental mindset for doing certain things. I'm still willing to play around with that in certain contexts. I'm thinking about doing like a commission set for that. But when I went to do an interview, so here's an example, is that I had that Batman with the tornado background printed up on a shirt when I went to go see Batman Begins in IMAX 2005. And some guys that worked at Sony saw it because my friend was working there and wanted to give me a job interview, but they were making sports games. So they thought that I was a good artist. And the art director had enough, the creative director had enough, you know, talent to be able to say, "Oh, this guy, because he can do this weird stuff, could easily, you know, translate that to sports or this and that." But the art directors couldn't. Like, it's really funny. They would just look at it and go, "Well, we don't need that for this." And he's like, "Look, whoever came up with that is probably someone you want to have around and give them an opportunity." And I couldn't get past that with them, you know? There was no anything to kind of compare or contrast it against. So again, I sort of like niched myself into doing one thing, right? First I did cartoons, and then I did cartoons with crazy perspective. So at the same time I started a job, let's go to number 3. At the same time I started a job, I got into graphic design doing t-shirts. I know I'm talking about t-shirts again, but that is a thing. So I started to build up how to do a layout, how to try to build some sense of focus or iconography, to syllabalize the word heavily. And I spent the next few years, or since then, between magazine layout for a game fan or play or whatever, between that and the t-shirts, really sort of learning how, if you look up layout and design, you'll probably get this golden circle rule, and you'll get all these you know, sort of like Da Vinci style advices, which is fine in the world of art. However, in the world of commercial art, i.e. People go into a store, look at a t-shirt, and that doesn't mean shit. I try to liken it more to tattoos. Like, how do you arrange something or build something so its silhouette or its attitude resonates to you regardless of style, right? So let's remove style from the subject material and say, look, it could be an anchor, it could be a skull, it could be Batman, it could be a Smurf. How could I arrange that in a way? And that, as a graphic designer, that's sort of what I learned how to do. And that's where I moved out of doing a lot of crazy perspective and learning how to sort of pose and frame elements or characters and elements being backgrounds or motorcycles or guns or whatever, how to frame them in a way that would catch your eye from a distance. And I've been able to test this when I go to conventions repeatedly. So that's really worked out for me. However, in doing all that graphic design and magazine layouts, now all the offers that I was getting was for creating magazines. I mean, I get a magazine offer 2 or 3 times a year. I get t-shirt offers all the time. And it's like, you know, I illustrate, you know, like I do other stuff. So, you know, and that's the last thing I want to do is that sort of stuff. So, and then plus other artists, you know, your peers tend to look at you and go, oh, you know, it'd be really great if you drew some more Ninja Turtles. And I'm like, well, I've been making a living doing this graphic design stuff because it paid. So, you know, that's the flip side, is that the less I draw and the more graphic design I do, the less recognizable you can become as well. I think that this is something true. Like, it's hard for someone to do graphic design and stand out unless they do one thing that is so different than anyone else that for a while you'll be able to tell where it came from. ISO 50 is a guy who created a look that I think everyone kind of knows if you know his name or not. In terms of posters, obviously the Drew Struzan style would be a way to sort of look at that. And then GameFan had a look in the 90s that I sort of tried to reinvent for now. So I think that became something that you could definitely see, you know, okay, these guys do these things, and if you knew where they came from, it'd come from that. However, the average person or who might see my art would never link that to graphic design. So that became sort of trouble. And let's move into 4. So then I get into cover design, right? So now that I understand how characters work, how backgrounds work, and I have a better understanding of iconography and t-shirts, I figured cover art would be great. So I got into drawing comic book covers, and that's been a lot of fun. But because all my covers are primarily women, the thing that I get now is offers to draw hot chicks. You know, which sounds great, but I gotta be honest with you, like, I sort of feel that drawing seductive women, I'm not that into it, you know, like, I find it fun. Like, to me, like, the hottest girls are kind of fully clothed. I don't know how to, you know, that says a little bit about me, but so I would draw more outfits and stuff and try to get into that when I would do covers and use my clothing to, you know, expertise to sort of design costumes or things that sort of work that into the subject material, as well as coloring my own art. At the time, I had only had another color, say Diego, or pretty much Diego would color my art. And I moved into coloring my own stuff, which, okay, so then brings up the new set of things. Okay, Rob, we would like you to color a book, right? We would like you to color this guy's stuff. And then I'm like, well, you know, the problem with that is I felt that more often than not, I was a better illustrator than those people. Not to sound egotistical, but a lot of times it's true. So I would spend a lot of time wanting to fix their art, which, you know, you can't do. As a colorist, you just come in and get it done, moving on. So that's not so well. And then again, I'm getting a lot of offers to draw hot chick books. I'm not in the mood to be an Ebass, you know, or Mike the Baffler, those guys. They're fantastic illustrators. They do a great job. I didn't get into like the books that interest me when I was growing up were like Spawn Bone, Savage Dragon, Leave It to Chance would be awesome. You know, like that. Dark Knight Returns was cool. Battle Chasers was awesome. I like Danger Girl, but not because some chick was putting her ass right into the thing, but because it had a really cool sort of G.I. Joe, you know, James Bond feel with some cool hot chicks. But I liked all the other guys in there too. I like the ninjas, the Storm Shadow reference, and the villains, and so it wasn't like I needed to put a girl's butt cheeks right up on the camera, and that did it for me. I wasn't a big like collector of Playboys and porn growing up. I wasn't really into that sort of thing. Like the kind of stuff that I liked was like if I liked a girl, I thought something was kind of cute or hot. You know, like the John Hughes movies, you know, those kind of girls, or Jennifer Connelly in that movie, she's trapped like in a Target opportunity knocks, I think. So that sort of stuff always interests me. I've never been really into like fetishes and stuff. So it's hard to relate as an artist or to be excited to draw something when, you know, it's based around cheesecake, because I don't really, it takes, plus it's not natural. So anytime you draw anything that's not inherently coming forth from your mind, you have to build a mindset. Like any day of the week, I'll watch Princess Mononoke over, you know, over Generation Girl videos. You know what I mean? Like I never liked the anime where it was just all about weird random sexual shit. So maybe, I don't know. It's just my thing. So then what? So then I get into painting. Now, the reason why I flipped. So I'm doing all digital work at that point, right? All my work is pretty much digital. There's some pencils, but I'm drawing digitally a lot too. And the thing is people have a belief that if you draw on the computer, it's somehow easier, that the computer's doing the work for you. And that may be true for some people. But for me, I don't believe the computer should do the work for you. The computer is a tool to do the work you want to get done. If you try to rely on the computer to do the work for you, you're basically clicking buttons and hoping something magical will appear, right? Like if I just slide the color around enough, I'll get some interesting effect, and that will be good, and I will be lucky. Not to say there isn't something to be said for happy accidents, but working in a studio, you have to be able to conceptualize something and then bring it forth. If you're just going to randomly slide things around until it looks good, you're in trouble when that doesn't work out for an art director or a client that isn't happy with it. Then what? So, and plus, if they ask why you did something and you're just like, well, I just clicked the buttons, that isn't going to like resonate with them. If you actually had a legitimate reason why you did something and it made sense, then they can buy into it too. So I got into traditional art because people see you painting, they go, wow, you're like, now it's legit, right? And this is true. Like if you only put pictures on the internet, right, and you don't have anything tangible to sell or to print, then that tangible thing or that print, that magazine or book that you made, that tangible asset is real to them. People still believe in real goods, despite what the mass consciousness might tell you. With digital items, that's all great, but tangibility equals what's the word I'm thinking of? Tangibility equals credibility. So tangible objects are credible. So I always wanted to paint, but it was too chicken shit to do it, and I finally just decided around 2010 or so to attempt. To do watercolor painting. I didn't want to do clean and clear watercolor painting because if I did really clean and clear stuff, one, it would take forever. I don't know. I felt it would take forever. But two, I have Photoshop. If I want to do really clean traditional art, then I have Photoshop to do that. I can make perfect clean art in the computer all day long. What I really wanted to do was sort of invoke an emotion, right? So that was my mentality going into it. And that sort of has translated into what I call the saucy painting style right now, or, as well as my other commissions, like the brutal style, which is a really gritty sort of, the He-Man kind of thing, or the Splatterhouse kind of style art. Sweet style, which is like a Saunders sort of inspired, Chris Saunders inspired kind of thing, which I haven't done much of in a long time, but I want to do more of that. Suave, which is just my really creative way of doing pencils, clean pencils. I call it Suave because if you brand things, people like it. And then the last thing would be Noir, which I really haven't done in a while since they're doing color stuff. But that's like saucy, but with black, white, and red. Because I like Sin City and things like that. And then as I started doing those paintings, I started getting less offers to do cover art and things like that because people sort of see you as being a traditional painter, which is really weird. All these things are hyper compressed, by the way. This is like every year, right? Something's changing and flipping around. And then I'm trying to mix it through as I go. So I'm doing covers while I'm doing paintings, while I'm doing graphic design, all simultaneously. Now, where does that lead me, right? If I don't want to be a full-time painter, I don't want to be a full-time colorist, I don't want to be a full-time graphic designer, I don't want to be a full-time character artist, I don't want to be I have a lot of what I don't want to be in life, right? The only thing that is sort of missing from that equation is background art. And the reason why background art came up was in August of last year, I got the Imagine FX Artist of the Month, right? The Artist of the Month title, which is pretty cool. And I had stated in there that a place I'd like to work for that would be a dream job would be Blizzard Software, which is true. And someone who worked at Blizzard reached out to me and said that they thought, my art really caught their eye and they'd be willing to recommend me if I applied for a job, which is crazy, right? However, looking at job postings, it's one of two things. You're either working in characters or you're working in backgrounds. And if you're working in characters, they graphic stuff and cartoony characters are great, or say, overly developed characters are great, but a lot of times it's really a lot of traditional sort of realistic musculature stuff. And I don't care enough about drawing the human body to spend forever rendering out perfect pecs and abs and stuff like that. But backgrounds I absolutely love. I love an atmosphere. Your character is only as good as the world it exists in. I've always believed that. And that's what I kind of started out doing. But to do concept painting in Photoshop, I only done it once in college, and I did an okay job of it. I mean, matter of fact, I did such an okay job of it that I was accused by the teacher of stealing the art from another teacher, which was weird because I didn't even know the teacher they spoke of. So I'd been there so long. Teachers change all the time. So that was an interesting... I had to go and prove that I made the fucking thing. So, yeah. Anyway, let's not complain about art schools. Fuck them. So I started digital landscape painting. To try to get a job at Blizzard? I don't know. I can't guarantee that. To do that, I still have to go back into Maya and really learn how to block mesh, which is something I never did in Maya. I always did like some light modeling or animation or texturing. And I don't really know how to block mesh out of Maya. I understand the process, but locking down a drawing and then block meshing out of a sketch is not something I'm familiar how to do. And there really aren't any tutorials I can find on it on the internet, even though it seems to be like a really basic thing. I don't know why they don't just fucking have one. If any of you have any tutorials on how to do that in Maya, please send them my way to Rob at Skechcraft. C-R-A-F-T, Skechcraft.com, Rob at Skechcraft.com. So in the meantime, the paintings aren't just a way of trying to get a job in games, which I understand would probably be me moving every year or two, which doesn't sound, that fun. However, it is a way I have t-shirts, and it is fun to do. But more to the point, if I love drawing cartoony characters, if I love drawing paintings, I love doing covers, and now I sort of worked out, a process for doing landscape paintings. At this point, I'm surprisingly competent at it. The thing I took away from all that is that it's not as hard as I thought it'd be. So what next, right? How do I wrap this up? And I've talked about this briefly before, but I'm really sort of like locking it down now, is I'm going to be producing original comics, okay? From me, written by me, drawn by me, colored by me for you. That means I have to be productive in how I work and efficient. So there'll be some limited color options, or I'll have to work all that out as I go along. I'm not going to sit there and try and create this masterpiece in my room for a year or two and then release it on the public. It's probably going to be released in a webcomic format, and that I will collect and expand into. However, I won't be drawing it like a typical goofy-ass webcomic, that you can get on Kotaku or everywhere else. Luckily, I can draw pretty well. Most people get into doing webcomics because they can't draw, and that's kind of what they do. They're quirky. I'm going to be putting everything I've done into it. I'm doing it because it allows me to be productive. I can put something out once or twice, or maybe 3 or 4 times a week, depending on how efficient I get it. And I don't have to spend forever doing just one page. But I do have to have a story. And luckily, the last 12 years, I've been writing all my ideas down. And I've pitched them to people, and I've sold some ideas that have not, that got bought or didn't work out for whatever reason. And the top 3 I've been working over the last couple of years and flipping back and forth on what to do. And I mentioned them briefly. One was called Justice, one was called Dungeon Heist. But what I've sort of culminated down to is I'm calling this one, this is sort of what Super Dungeon Heist used to be, and it's called Super Saga Academy. And the reason why it's called Super Saga Academy is that I'll be changing the last name based on the volume and how it's going to morph as I go along. So like Super Saga Academy, then it could be Super Saga, Stadium or Tactics or something like that, however I want to do it. But I went with Super Saga. I already got the supersagacomic.com paid for. The reason I went with Super Saga instead of, say, Super Dungeon Heist is there's a board game that came out the last year called Super Dungeon Explorer, which is funny because I'm looking at it like, yeah, every idea has 2 years. And I just don't want it to cross-brand that. So Super Saga is actually great because I'm not just limited to dungeon-based. And basically, it's going to be a cross between Final Fantasy Tactics, Dragon Quest, and Hogwarts. It kind of started off, the basics were to start off about a girl who comes into town and works at her uncle's retro video game store. And it's a world where JRPGs are real, like not the actual games, but everything based on the games exists in real life. So it's a world where the world is governed by the laws of JRPGs. But they make video games about them too. So like Tactics and Chrono Trigger and Final Fantasy are games in the world, or variations of it, maybe parody games, right? So I can get away with that, definitely parody. And they have video games and conventions and cosplay. And so she works at this retro game store, and then goes to school to enter a guild during the day, or parts of the day, which will allow me to sort of play off various things. So there'll be, dungeon stadiums, airships, quests, video game conventions, cosplay raids, and lastly, there will be slimes, because I love slimes. And so this is where it will start. I have a deep love for video games and JRPGs that I grew up with, like Shining Force and Tactics and Dragon Quest and Ni no Kuni, which is new, and I love that. And I really love those worlds, and I've spent a long time wanting to do something in them, but just didn't possess all the skill sets I felt up until now to do any of it kind of justice or have something to say about it. Plus all the stuff that I wanted to do in Game Fan, or Game Cave when I was kind of putting that together, will all work into this. So you'll be seeing that. I'm going to start drawing it around June of this year, post Phoenix Con, which is in May. Right now I'm writing and building everything. I already have a year's worth of world building, and when it was going to be dungeon heists, just focus on heists and stuff, I have those elements of what the world is going to be, which have folded into this. But the reason why I'm not starting with heists and stuff is I really don't want my writing right now. I don't like it when people focus on like Rube Goldberg mechanics. If you don't know what a Rube Goldberg machine, it's like a mousetrap. It's like this goes this goes this goes this, and I don't really like stories that are focused on big events, like, okay, and then he gets the sword. Here's an example, right? Your character gets the sword, and once he gets the sword, it unlocks this thing, and he realizes he becomes, or she becomes, this ruler of this stuff, and it's this really big sort of epic transcendental stuff I can't relate to. What I've always related to is really sort of character-driven pieces. So, like, what I mean by that is it's not so important that your character, look at Breaking Bad, it's not so important, if you look at that show Breaking Bad, it's not so important that he become a drug kingpin, right? It's all the little experiences along the way that sort of develop that's sort of something that comes out of it, But if it was all about him becoming that, then things sort of have to unnecessarily escalate. As opposed to sort of hyper-focusing, when they're making the meth in the show, they sort of hyper-focus on how it's created and sort of like play around with those. It's that sort of hyper-focus that I find interesting from a storytelling perspective. So understand this. Please take my word for it for now until you read it, that I do understand these things about writing. I'll have to obviously keep developing, good dialogue and interesting characters, and whether that occurs immediately or if that's a time in thing, fine. But the goal has always been to spend 2 or 3 years on any one project and move to the next. So my goal with this is basically to move the stages of this, if it's going to be a 3-part thing, one a year. So it'd be like a 48-page or somewhere between 40 and 60 pages per tome, and then 3 tomes total, and at the end of 3 years, I'll have a 150-page hardcover thing I could maybe Kickstarter do. In the meantime, I'll have a webcomic, and then there'll be individual runs I'll do, maybe where I sign and do something, offer something in the store, or that you could just purchase straight off if you want to own them individually. In the meantime, I have been working diligently the past year on this business model and everything else. So very difficult to lock down how I wanted to do everything. The order in which I wanted to do it, but I'm very, very excited about this. I'm very, very happy. It's something that I definitely want to do, and I know there is no way on God's green earth I could pitch this to the industry, comic book industry as it stands. They'd send me over to Tokyo Pop, and then they'd want to own it, and I this is just something that I've always wanted to do, and now I feel is the time, and I have the availability to do it. So join me on this quest for Super Saga Academy. So you'll be seeing more of that as I go along. All right, that's it for today's cast. It's a long one. If you have any questions, comments, tips, or whatever, please send them to rob@sketchcraft. That's the name of the podcast.com. Be sure to also go check out our Facebook page and like that if you could, or give us a review, positive or negative, on iTunes, Sketchcraft on iTunes, and I have a YouTube channel. All links are available at sketchcraft.com, and if you just type Sketchcraft into Google, they will all pop up, so you can get all sorts of random things there. I will be talking to you all soon. The next cast is my interview with Ray Height. See you all there.